6 months after burying my husband, I sat across from my financial advisor and watched his hands tremble as he laid a thick stack of bank statements across his polished mahogany desk. He took a breath, steadied himself, and said, "Sarah, your son has stolen nearly $2 million from you and Robert over the last 8 years." I stared at the numbers, unable to blink, unable to breathe. In that moment, I understood something cruel and sharp. John hadn't just robbed us. He had been waiting for grief to finish me off so he could take whatever was left. But I wasn't gone. I was right here. And for the first time since Robert died, I felt more anger than sorrow. If you're still with me this far, you can gently subscribe for more stories like this. And you can tell me where you're listening from. It always brings comfort to know where these words travel. Now let me tell you how I reached this moment. Sitting in David Chambers' office on a gray October morning, staring at proof that my only child was not the devoted, responsible son I believed he was, but a polished thief wearing a $1,000 suit. It had been 6 months and 12 days since Robert died. A sudden heart attack. Quick and clean, the doctor said, as if that softened anything. 45 years of marriage ended in a single afternoon. He left behind his half-finished crossword puzzle on the kitchen table and a cup of coffee that went cold while I waited for the ambulance. My grief had been heavy, but manageable. Mostly because it came with endless tasks to keep me occupied. Funeral arrangements, legal paperwork, insurance claims, probate court, forms, signatures, decisions, phone calls. John had stepped in during that time like a dutiful son. Attentive, supportive, taking responsibility for our finances so I could focus on healing. "Mom, let me handle the accounts," he'd said, standing in Robert's home office with that careful, sympathetic expression he used to wear as a boy when he wanted something. "You shouldn't worry about any of this right now." I was grateful. John worked in finance, successful by all appearances. He drove a BMW, lived in a house in Wilmette that cost more than I had spent on cars in my entire lifetime. His wife wore designer clothes. Their twins went to Europe for spring break. Everything about their life screamed stability and competence. So I trusted him. I signed the papers he put in front of me, gave him power of attorney. Let him manage things while I tried to understand what life without Robert looked like. David Chambers had been our financial advisor for 2 decades. A meticulous man who kept his desk arranged with military precision. He called me that morning with a voice I didn't recognize. "Sarah, I need you to come in immediately. There's something we need to discuss about your accounts. Come alone, and don't mention this call to John." The drive to his office was familiar. Chicago traffic. Orange leaves drifting through the air. The same route Robert and I used to take for quarterly reviews. I expected a conversation about the market. I did not expect to learn that my own son had been stealing from us for years. David pointed to the earliest entries. Small withdrawals at first, 5,000, 10,000, explained away as investments, opportunities, emergencies. Then the withdrawals grew, and a pattern emerged: systematic transfers, forged signatures, hidden accounts, moves timed with Robert's health emergencies. "When your husband had surgery 2 years ago," David said quietly, "John moved $400,000 to an offshore account. When Robert was in the hospital with pneumonia last Christmas, another 200,000 disappeared." A cold wave rolled through me. He was waiting for Robert to die. "That's my belief," David said. "With your husband gone, and you overwhelmed by grief, he could have emptied everything. You might never have questioned it." But Robert never followed the script John wrote for him. He recovered from every scare until the final one took him unexpectedly. "How much is left?" I asked. David glanced at another sheet. "Of your original $4 million, about $2.3 million remains. The house is paid off. And the life insurance, $800,000, is untouched because John wasn't the beneficiary." So I wasn't ruined, not financially. But the betrayal, that was another story entirely. I gathered the papers into a neat stack. "David, I need you to do exactly what I ask, and I need it done today." He leaned forward. "First, change every password on every account. Remove John's access immediately. Second, move everything to new accounts at a different bank. Third, I want copies of every document from the last 10 years. I paused. And fourth, set up a meeting with the FBI's white-collar crime division. Because my son was about to learn that grief doesn't make me helpless. It makes me alert. I drove home feeling like the floor beneath my life had shifted. The envelope of evidence sat beside me like a burning coal. Inside the house, everything looked the same, yet nothing felt familiar anymore. Family photographs on the mantel looked like fiction. John's smiling face in every picture felt like a lie. For 6 months, this home had been my shelter. Now it felt like the place where I'd been quietly betrayed. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. If John had been stealing from us for 8 years, his lifestyle should reflect it. His social media was a highlight reel of wealth. A $1.2 million house purchased 3 years ago, a Mercedes, a boat at Belmont Harbor, a country club membership, designer clothes, European vacations, private school tuition for both twins. Even with a successful consulting job, none of it added up. Not honestly anyway. My phone rang, John's name flashed on the screen. I felt my pulse kick up as I answered. "Hi Mom, just checking in. How was your day?" His voice was soft, warm, the same voice he used when he comforted me after Robert's funeral. But beneath it I heard something else. A watchfulness, a calculation. "Oh, fine," I said. "Just running errands. Are you eating enough? You sounded tired last week." Yesterday, I might have melted at his concern, but today I could hear it for what it really was, monitoring. "Actually, John," I said, "I was thinking about the investments. I want to start paying more attention." There was the slightest hesitation. "Mom, you don't need to worry about that. That's why I'm handling it. I'd still like to understand. Maybe we could go over everything this week." "Of course, absolutely. Let me pull things together, maybe next month when work slows down." Always later, always someday. Always delaying the truth. "I'd prefer this week," I said. I called David Chambers today. The silence on the line was short but sharp enough to cut through the air. "You called David. Why would you do that without telling me?" There it was. "Not worry, not concern, fear. He's been our advisor for 20 years, John," I said. "I don't need permission to speak with him." "Of course not," he said quickly. "I just meant we should coordinate." "What did you two talk about?" I could picture him pacing his office, trying to calculate how much damage had already been done. "Oh, just general questions about Robert's accounts, nothing specific." His relief was immediate. "Good. Good, well, let me know if you have any questions." But he knew, and I knew, the questions were finally coming. David meant well when he said he preferred to keep things simple for me, but the words settled in my chest like a small insult. Simple. As if I were an aging child who couldn't be trusted with adult conversations about my own money. When the call ended, I lowered myself into Robert's old chair and let the memories flood in. I thought about the little boy John once was. The one who cried the day he stepped on an ant by accident. The teenager who mowed lawns all summer to save for college. The young man who called me every week from California because he missed home. Somewhere along the line, that boy had vanished. And in his place stood a man who saw his parents as an opportunity rather than a responsibility. My phone buzzed. A message from Ashley. "Sarah, John mentioned you spoke with David today. Just wanted to make sure you're not worrying unnecessarily. We're here to help with anything you need." The coordination had already begun. They were closing ranks, locking their doors, preparing to guide my thinking before I could form any dangerous questions. I typed back slowly. "Thank you, dear. Just trying to understand Robert's affairs. You know how it is." Her reply was immediate. "Of course. It's smart to stay informed. Let us know if we can help explain anything." Explain anything. Meaning explain how they'd managed to build an entire lifestyle on stolen money. It was a conversation I doubted either of us would survive politely. The house phone rang. Margaret, my neighbor, the strongest woman I knew. "Sarah, are you all right? You walked in earlier with a look I haven't seen since Robert passed." Margaret was 72, sharp as a needle, with 4 children who adored her. She'd buried 2 husbands, fought off a son who tried to force her into a nursing home, and once chased off a burglar with a broom. If anyone could help me see clearly, it was her. "Can you come over? I need someone I trust." 5 minutes, she said. True to her word, she arrived with a bottle of wine and the determined expression she used whenever life got messy. I laid David's documents across the dining table and told her everything. She read page after page, shaking her head, muttering under her breath. When she finally looked up, her voice carried the weight of experience. That calculating little bastard. How long are you going to let him think he's winning? That was all it took for the dam to break. We spent the next 3 hours strategizing what Margaret proudly labeled Operation Full Disclosure. The wine helped loosen the fear, and maybe it made our ideas more dramatic, but the planning felt like reclaiming something I thought I'd lost. First rule of warfare, Margaret said, topping off our glasses. Know your enemy's weaknesses. So tell me, what does John care about most? I thought about him with fresh eyes, his reputation, his spotless image, how his coworkers respected him, how Ashley thrived on being seen as the perfect wife. The country club, the charity events, the private school they bragged about. Status meant everything to them. Margaret jotted down notes like a general preparing a military strike. So if their lifestyle collapses, if their friends learn how their life has been funded, it destroys them. I nodded. And evidence, she pressed. Every step needs to be documented. I told her about my meeting with the FBI, the bank transfers, the new accounts David created, the files I'd already requested. Good, she said, that's defense, now offense. We built a list: John's employer, the country club board, the twins' school, anyone who unknowingly benefited from our money. I want to see the look on his face when it all comes crashing down, I whispered, surprised by the sharpness of my own anger. Oh, sweetheart, Margaret said kindly, patting my hand. By the time we're done, he'll wish he'd simply asked to borrow the money. The next morning, I drove downtown to the FBI field office. Special Agent Rebecca Morrison was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with a focused intensity that told me she took fraud very seriously. Mrs. Mitchell, thank you for coming. Elder financial abuse is a major priority, especially when it involves patterns this significant. She examined David's files with the precision of someone who had seen every kind of deception. Your son was very thorough, she said. Almost too thorough. He left an incredibly clear paper trail. Transfers, forged signatures, timing patterns. This is intentional fraud. My stomach twisted. What happens next? We'll conduct formal interviews, collect more records, and most likely obtain search warrants for his home and office. But I need to ask, are you prepared for this to become public? Federal cases draw media attention. Court hearings become part of the public record. I thought of Robert. Of his belief that doing the right thing rarely aligned with doing the easy thing. Agent Morrison, my son stole $2 million from the people who raised him. He did it while smiling in our faces. If this isn't worth facing the public, nothing is. For the first time, the agent smiled. We'll be in touch soon. Until then, don't change your behavior around him. Act normal. Let him think he still has control. Acting normal was more difficult than I expected. John called that evening, his tone soft and warm. Mom, I've been thinking. Maybe we should start reviewing your monthly expenses. Monthly expenses, not investments, not retirement funds, just the surface-level parts he thought I could understand. That sounds great, I said gently. I'd also like to talk about the bigger picture, the investments, the long-term plans, all of it. Well, let's start small, he insisted. We can work toward the more complicated things. There it was again. That infuriating assumption that I couldn't handle complexity. After running a home, a family, and standing beside a husband who built a multi-million-dollar business, he still saw me as fragile. Whatever you think is best, I said. Great, how about Sunday dinner? Ashley's making your favorite pot roast. So I would sit at their stolen table, eating a stolen meal, served on plates bought with stolen money, and smile politely. I'll bring dessert. When I hung up, I immediately called Margaret. How long do you think I can pretend like this? Not long, she said. But that's fine. Once the FBI moves, it won't be your burden anymore. That night, sleep refused to come. I thought of every birthday hug, every thank you note Ashley had written on stationery bought with my money, every lie John had told while pretending to care. Mostly, I thought of Robert, how he trusted John. How he died believing his son would take care of me. Robert had been wrong about John, but he had never been wrong about me. I was strong enough to survive him, strong enough to survive betrayal, and strong enough to make sure our son paid for every dollar he stole. The next morning brought clarity, a plan Robert would have admired. Sunday dinner felt like theater. Their dining room glowed with warm lighting, expensive decor, and the confidence of people who thought their world was secure. I ate pot roast that cost more than my weekly groceries once had, and pretended not to notice the price tag of everything around me. The house practically shouted the truth. The chandelier in the foyer, likely 15,000. Ashley's diamond earrings, another 10. Before we go deeper, if you're following this journey, you're welcome to stay connected by subscribing. And if you're listening from somewhere new today, tell me where. It's always comforting to know whose company I'm in. Their perfect life had been built on our savings, and soon it would all unravel. The wine John poured with that effortless display of confidence was a bottle I recognized from the upscale liquor store, one that cost nearly $300. Before I could take a sip, Emma, my 15-year-old granddaughter, leaped up from her chair with bright eyes. "Grandma Sarah, look what I learned in dance class." She twirled through the dining room, feet pointed, posture perfect, the kind of routine that didn't come from casual lessons but from expensive private coaching. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," I told her, and I meant every word. Whatever John had done, the twins were innocent. Emma and Tyler were good kids, blissfully unaware that their comfortable world had been built on money stolen straight from their grandparents. Ashley watched her daughter with glowing pride. "Emma's teacher says she has real potential. She's been invited to audition for the Chicago Youth Ballet's summer intensive program." "How wonderful," I said softly. "That must be very competitive." "Oh, it is, and expensive." Ashley laughed lightly, the kind of laugh wealthy women use when discussing numbers that would break most families. "But it's such an opportunity. The program fee alone is $18,000, plus housing and living expenses in New York." 18,000. Enough to buy a reliable used car. Enough to fund a year of someone's rent. And all of it paid for with money stolen from Robert's retirement account. "I'm sure she'll do wonderfully," I said, cutting another bite of pot roast while forcing my face to stay calm. John lifted his wine glass with a bright smile. "To family, to supporting each other through everything." The irony was so thick it nearly lodged in my throat. But I raised my glass, just as expected, and smiled like the loving mother they still believed me to be. After dinner, John led me to his home office under the guise of financial education. The space looked like a Hollywood set designed to portray a successful man. Leather-bound books, a polished mahogany desk, diplomas in heavy frames, industry awards lined up like trophies for integrity. John pulled out a folder. "I thought we'd start with your basic monthly budget, just so you understand where your money goes." The papers were legitimate. Utility bills, taxes, grocery lists, all the manageable and harmless pieces of a modest life totaling maybe $3,000 a month. "As you can see," he said, "Robert did a great job making sure you're set for a comfortable retirement." I nodded politely. It's reassuring to see it all laid out. But what about the bigger picture, the investments, savings? His smile tightened, still warm, but with the careful caution of a man who felt a threat approaching. "Those are much more complex, Mom. Market fluctuations, asset allocation, overall risk strategy. It's better if I manage those details and just keep you informed of the highlights." "But I'd like to understand," I insisted. "Maybe you could show me the actual statements." "Of course," he said smoothly. "Let me gather everything together and we'll go through it properly. Maybe next month when I have more time to explain the complexities." Next month. Always next month, so I shifted the tone. "Actually," I said, casually pulling out my phone, "I can look at them myself. David gave me the new passwords when I visited him." The color drained from John's face so quickly it was almost theatrical. "New passwords?" I feigned mild surprise. "Oh yes, he said it was routine security maintenance, updating access codes and all that. Didn't he contact you?" His hand tightened around his wine glass. "No," he said flatly. "He didn't mention that when I spoke to him last week." "Interesting. John had been calling David, probably to monitor everything, to keep control. I smiled softly, like I didn't notice the tension crawling into the room. Well, it's probably nothing important. They update everything nowadays, don't they? But he wasn't fooled. Mom, what exactly did you discuss with David? I want to be sure you're getting consistent information. Time to push carefully. Oh, nothing much. Just general questions. Some transactions I didn't remember discussing with Robert. John went still, the kind of stillness that only guilty people master. What transactions? Oh, just some large withdrawals, I said thoughtfully. Tens of thousands for investment opportunities, I suppose. I just wondered what we invested in. He jumped in quickly. Those were diversification moves. Dad asked me to help shift money into higher-yield accounts, more sophisticated products than your basic savings. How wonderful, I said sweetly. Are they performing well? Very well, he replied too quickly. Excellent returns. Could I see the statements for those accounts? His jaw tightened. They're complex institutional products, Mom. The statements are difficult to interpret without professional training. I smiled, soft, warm, deceptively gentle. I'm sure I can manage. After all, it's my money. Before he could respond, his phone rang. He excused himself, stepping into the hallway, but his voice seeped through the thin walls. She's asking questions. David changed the passwords. No, I can't access anything now. We need to be careful. When he returned, he wore a completely different mask. The distant, polished tone of a financial advisor addressing a delicate client. Mom, I'm concerned. You've been under stress. Grief can make people fixate on things that are already being handled properly. Have you considered counseling? There it was, gaslighting, turning my clarity into instability. I nodded slowly, pretending to consider it. That's interesting, because David said he was very pleased I'm taking an active role. He said it shows real mental clarity and strength. John's smile stiffened at the edges. Of course, I just don't want you to stress. Oh, I'm not stressed, I said calmly. Actually, I haven't felt this energized in months. On the drive home, Margaret called. Well, she asked. I may have pushed a little too hard, I admitted. He knows something's wrong. Good, she said firmly. Let him sweat. Guilty men always crack when they're nervous. When I walked into my house, the answering machine light blinked. Ashley's voice floated through the kitchen. Hi, Sarah, I just wanted to follow up about the ballet program. I might have gotten the cost wrong. It's not as expensive as I said. John sometimes exaggerates. Too late. I had already run every number myself. The next morning, Agent Morrison's call made my coffee taste like triumph. Mrs. Mitchell, we've completed our preliminary investigation. Tomorrow at 6 a.m., we'll execute search warrants on your son's home and office. We'll be freezing his accounts and placing holds on assets purchased in the last 5 years. How long before arrests? I asked quietly. If the evidence supports charges, and it does within the week. But you must act normal until we move. If he panics, he may destroy evidence or flee. After hanging up, I sat in Robert's chair and finally let myself feel it, that rising surge of justice long overdue. John's perfect world was mere hours away from crumbling. My phone rang again. John. Mom, I've been thinking about Sunday. Maybe I was overprotective. You deserve full clarity. Why don't you come to my office today? We'll go through everything together. Too little, far too late. That would be wonderful, I said gently. 2 o'clock works perfectly. When I arrived, the extravagance was impossible to ignore. Premium office space, lake views, luxury furniture. For someone with a modest client list, John was spending like a man who believed money grew on trees. The receptionist greeted me like royalty. Mrs. Mitchell, we're so sorry for your loss. John speaks about you all the time. John emerged wearing a suit Robert would have called funeral expensive, his smile warm but tight. He gestured to a huge stack of papers. I brought every statement from the last 10 years. Let's start with an overview. The summaries looked official, but the accounts listed didn't match anything David had shown me. John, I said quietly, pointing to several unfamiliar funds, I don't remember opening these. And the smile on his face finally cracked. Dad had handled most of the investment decisions. According to John, Robert had been forward-thinking about diversification strategies, always planning ahead. But as I kept reading through the papers laid out on his polished desk, my confusion only deepened. Because according to those statements, I had nearly $4 million safely growing across various investment accounts. Yet David had shown me documented proof that most of that money was long gone. Then it clicked. John hadn't just misrepresented things, he'd manufactured an entire financial universe. These weren't summaries, they were elaborate, professional-looking forgeries. Fake statements created to convince me our money was still invested while he quietly drained it dry. These look very comprehensive, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Could we call David and have him walk us through how these connect to his records? I'd hate for there to be any inconsistencies. John's hand froze above the papers, hovering in midair. Actually, that's not necessary, he said carefully. These are consolidated reports. They include all the accounts David manages, plus additional investments I've made on your behalf. Additional investments, I repeated softly. Yes, higher-yield opportunities, international markets, private equity, instruments David's firm doesn't handle. I nodded slowly, as if impressed. How exciting! Could I see the statements for those accounts directly? I'd love to understand what we're invested in. His voice tightened immediately. Those are institutional-level products, Mom. The reporting is extremely technical. We were right back to the too complex for Mom routine. But this time, the evidence of his deception was sitting right in front of me. John, I said gently, folding my hands in my lap, I need to ask you something important. He leaned forward, his expression full of concerned attentiveness, the mask he wore so easily. These investment accounts you've shown me, the balances, the performance numbers, are they real? I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Fear, calculation, denial, one by one. Of course they're real, he said. Why would you ask that? Because, I answered softly, David showed me our actual account balances last week, and they don't match what you're showing me today. For a moment, John's face ran through several emotions like a reel of film. Surprise, confusion, anger, then back to an expression meant to mimic gentle bewilderment. Mom, David is a good advisor, but he only manages part of our portfolio. He wouldn't have visibility into the full picture. Then let's call him right now, I said calmly. We'll get everything sorted out. John glanced at his watch, stalling. He's probably not available this late. Let me schedule a three-way meeting for tomorrow. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone before he could protest, let me try him now. I dialed David's direct number. He answered on the second ring. Sarah, his voice held caution. How are you? I'm fine, David, I said. I'm sitting with John reviewing some investment statements. Could you help us reconcile a few numbers? Of course, he said. What specific accounts? I read off several account numbers from John's statements. The silence that followed was long and heavy. Sarah, David said at last, I don't show any accounts with those numbers in our system. Where did these statements come from? John reached for my phone immediately. Let me talk to him. There's obviously some confusion about reporting formats. I held the phone out of his reach. David, John says these are additional investments he made for us, accounts you wouldn't manage directly. His tone shifted, sharp, direct, serious. Sarah, based on what we discussed last week, you and I should meet privately tomorrow morning. There are things we need to clarify. I ended the call and looked at John. His face had gone pale. Mom, I can explain everything. I hope so, I said quietly. Because right now, it looks like you've been showing me fake statements while stealing my money for 8 years. For the first time, the mask dropped entirely. I saw the real John, cornered, calculating, desperate. But just as quickly, the mask snapped back into place. That's a very serious accusation, he said smoothly. I think your grief may be affecting your judgment. Too late, I had seen the truth. Tomorrow morning, I said, standing and gathering my purse, we're meeting with David and the FBI to sort this out properly. John's face turned chalk white. The FBI? Oh yes, I said lightly. Didn't I mention? They take financial elder abuse very seriously, especially when it involves systematic theft by family members. I stepped toward the door, then paused and smiled, the kind of smile only a grandmother can deliver. By the way, you might want to call Ashley. She should resign from the country club board before tomorrow's news cycle. Charity organizations can be so particular about stolen money funding membership fees. As I walked out, I heard him frantically dialing his phone, panic already rising. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day. I woke at 5:30 a.m. to my phone buzzing. Agent Morrison's voice was crisp. "Mrs. Mitchell, we're moving in 30 minutes. Are you safe?" "I'm at home." "Good. Stay there until we contact you. And Mrs. Mitchell, you may want to turn on the local news around 8. I made coffee, hands steady, and sat in Robert's chair to wait. At 6 a.m., faint sirens drifted through the distance, growing louder. They weren't heading for my street, but I knew exactly where they were going. By 6:15, my phone was ringing nonstop. Margaret called first. "Sarah, I just saw FBI vehicles heading toward Wetka. Please tell me that's what I think it is." "That," I said, "would be Operation Full Disclosure entering its final phase." "Hot damn," she said. "I'm coming with pastries. We're watching this live." The next call was Ashley, her voice high and frantic. "Sarah, there are federal agents at our house. They have search warrants. They're going through everything. John's office, our computers, what is happening?" I took a slow sip of coffee. "I imagine they're investigating financial crimes, dear. You should probably call a lawyer." "Financial crimes. John hasn't done anything wrong." "Ashley, sweetheart, John has been stealing from Robert and me for 8 years, nearly $2 million. The FBI has the evidence." Silence. Long, painful, heavy. "That's impossible," she whispered. "John would never." "John did," I said gently. "And now he's going to face the consequences." The line went dead. Margaret arrived seconds later with pastries just as the morning news switched to breaking coverage. Helicopter footage filled my living room, agents carrying boxes out of John's house and office. Financial advisor John Mitchell was arrested this morning on charges of elder financial abuse and wire fraud, the anchor announced. Federal prosecutors allege Mitchell systematically stole nearly $2 million from his elderly parents over an 8-year period. The camera showed John in handcuffs, face twisted in a mix of rage, disbelief, and humiliation. Margaret squeezed my hand. "Look at you," she whispered. "Robert would be so proud." As the story continued, my phone rang again, this time, Emma's trembling voice on the line. "Grandma, there are reporters at our school. Kids are saying Daddy was arrested." "Is it true?" My heart tugged. Whatever John had done, Emma and Tyler were innocent. "Yes, sweetheart," I said softly. "It's true. Your father made serious mistakes with money that belonged to your grandfather and me." "Are we going to be okay?" she asked quietly, the question of every child whose world is suddenly uncertain. "You're going to be fine," I said firmly. "You and Tyler will always be okay. This is between the grown-ups. You're still loved, still safe, still going to be taken care of." "Can I come see you after school?" Emma whispered. "Of course," I told her gently. "I'll pick you up myself." After hanging up, I realized what I had just promised, facing the reporters, the chaos, the attention. But Emma needed stability more than anything else. And right now, I was the only person who could give that to her. The afternoon pickup at the twins' school felt unreal. Reporters lined the sidewalks, shouting questions, cameras flashing. Every step I took captured like I was walking through a storm of noise and judgment. The school had security posted, but even that wasn't enough to quiet the frenzy of a federal crime story involving stolen millions and a prominent family falling apart. Emma rushed toward me the second she saw me, her face tear-streaked, her voice trembling. "Grandma, everyone was staring at us. The teachers kept whispering, and some kids said we're going to be homeless." I wrapped my arms around her, feeling her whole body shaking from trying to hold herself together all day. "Where's Tyler?" I asked softly. "He got in a fight," she said, wiping her cheeks. "Jake Morrison said Daddy was a criminal and Tyler punched him. He's in the principal's office." When I found Tyler, he sat stiffly in a chair much too big for his small, angry body. His lip was split, his eyes blazing with wounded pride. Principal Henderson exhaled when he saw me. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm so sorry. Tyler was defending his family, which I understand, but we can't allow fighting." "Of course not," I said. Then I knelt beside Tyler. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, but the pain behind his eyes was unmistakable. 13 is old enough to understand that your world just cracked open, but too young to know how to hold the pieces. Can we go home now? He whispered. We're going to my house, I told him. Your mother is dealing with some difficult things right now. As we drove, Emma's small voice broke the silence. Grandma, what's going to happen to Daddy? I looked at her in the rearview mirror, this beautiful girl who carried John's eyes, John's smile, and tried to choose words that told the truth without crushing her. Your father broke the law, sweetheart. He's going to have to face the consequences. That usually means prison. For how long? I don't know, I said softly. That will depend on the judge. Tyler spoke suddenly, staring out the window. Good, Tyler, I began. No, Grandma, he deserves it. His voice cracked. I heard him and Mom fighting about money all the time. I heard him talking about accounts and transfers. I didn't understand back then, but I do now. Children see more than adults ever admit. Tyler had witnessed pieces of the crime without knowing what he was watching. When we arrived at my house, I called Ashley. No answer. I left a message explaining that the twins were with me and safe, and that I'd keep them until she was ready to speak to them. That evening, Emma and Tyler worked on homework at my dining room table. The same table where Robert and I planned our retirement. The same table where John had eaten countless dinners while stealing from us. And yet, for the first time in months, I felt something surprising. Peace. For 6 months after Robert died, I'd moved through my life like a shadow, breathing, working, surviving, but not living. Today, for the first time, my mind felt awake. Focused. Steady. I'd protected my grandchildren. I'd exposed a criminal. I'd taken back control of the life John thought he could quietly dismantle. Robert would have been proud. The next morning, a soft knock sounded at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, Ashley stood on my porch looking like the shell of the polished woman she always presented to the world. Hair unkempt, makeup smudged, her expensive blouse wrinkled and clinging to her like it no longer belonged to her life. I want to see my children, she said. Of course, I told her. Come in. She followed me into the kitchen, where Emma and Tyler were eating pancakes, arguing about who got the TV remote first, children trying desperately to cling to something normal. Mom, Emma ran to her and hugged her tightly. Ashley broke down immediately. Tyler hesitated, then approached, worry etched across his face. Are you okay? He asked, voice small. Ashley pulled them both into her arms. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I watched her, studying every expression, every tremble in her voice. Ashley had lived richly on stolen money, but had she known? Had she been willfully blind? Had she asked and accepted lies because the truth was inconvenient? Looking at her now, at the devastation on her face, I believed her. Ashley had wanted their beautiful life to be real. She hadn't wanted to peel back the layers of her husband's success. What happens now? Tyler asked. Ashley exhaled shakily. The FBI froze all our accounts. We're losing the house. They say it was bought with stolen money. I can't even use my debit card to buy groceries. Where will we live? Emma whispered. I don't know yet. Maybe with my sister in Phoenix, just until things settle. Emma's eyes filled with panic. We have to move to Arizona. It might only be temporary, Ashley said, but she sounded unsure. I surprised myself with what I said next. You can stay here temporarily, I told her, until you figure out what comes next. Ashley stared at me like she couldn't understand the language I was speaking. Sarah, after everything, her voice cracked. Why would you help us? John stole from you. We lived off the money he stole. It was a fair question, but the answer came easily. Because punishing children for their father's crimes isn't justice, I said quietly. It's just more pain. And because, I paused, thinking of Robert, of the man he had been. Because helping is what good people do, even when it's hard. Ashley broke down again, but this time the grief was mixed with genuine gratitude. There will be conditions, I added gently. Honesty, full cooperation with the FBI, no secrets, no lies. I understand, she whispered. And I swear I didn't know. Maybe she hadn't. Maybe she'd simply looked away because looking closer would have shattered the life she adored. Either way, the children needed shelter. They needed stability, and I could give them that. That afternoon, Agent Morrison called. He's being held without bail, she said. His attorney is trying to negotiate a plea deal, but we're not interested unless he agrees to full restitution and information about any other victims. Other victims, I repeated. We have evidence that your son may have run similar schemes with other elderly clients. We're investigating several additional cases. I sat down, the weight of those words pressing into me. John hadn't just stolen from Robert and me. He had made a career out of preying on the vulnerable. He had built his life on betrayal. Mrs. Mitchell, Agent Morrison continued gently, you should prepare for a long legal process. Even with a guilty plea, this will take months. Hearings, restitution, impact statements. It won't be easy. I took a breath, feeling the steady resolve that had been growing inside me since the moment I'd walked into David's office. My son didn't just steal money, I said quietly. He stole our security, our trust, our peace. I'm prepared for whatever comes next. If pursuing this case meant preventing him from doing the same thing to other families, then yes, I was prepared for whatever it would take. Good, Agent Morrison told me, because we're going to need your help building the strongest possible case. That evening, after Ashley and the children had gone to bed, I settled into Robert's chair and opened the bottle of wine Margaret had brought over. For the first time in months, I wasn't drinking to numb anything. I wasn't chasing quiet or blocking out pain. I was celebrating. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, legal proceedings, reporters, court hearings, the complicated task of rebuilding trust with my grandchildren while their father sat in a federal prison cell. But that night, I felt proud of the woman I had become. Strong enough to expose my own son's crimes. Compassionate enough to protect his innocent family. Wise enough to understand that justice and revenge were not the same thing. I lifted my glass toward Robert's photograph on the mantel. We did good, honey, I whispered. We raised a thief, but we also taught him to face consequences. And you taught me to be stronger than I ever knew I could be. The house felt peaceful, quiet breathing upstairs from children who had lost so much in such a short time, yet who would wake up safe, fed, and loved. For the first time in 6 months, that felt like enough. 3 weeks later, John's attorney requested a meeting. Patrick Sullivan was exactly the type of man I expected, polished suit, practiced charm, the kind of lawyer who specialized in making wealthy people's problems quietly vanish. We met at David Chambers' office, neutral ground where I felt anchored. Sullivan unfolded legal documents across the conference table like a dealer laying out cards. Mrs. Mitchell, my client would like to discuss a resolution that could benefit everyone involved. Your client, I reminded him, is my son, and your client is a thief. What could he possibly offer me that I don't already have? Sullivan offered a professional, empty smile. Full restitution, Mrs. Mitchell, every penny returned with interest, if you'll cooperate in pursuing a reduced sentence. I glanced at the numbers he'd written. $2.3 million, more than John should have even had access to, considering most of the stolen funds were supposedly gone. And where would this restitution come from? John made several successful investments with the funds in question, Sullivan said smoothly. Despite the irregularities, the investments performed extremely well. So he had gambled with our money. And won. That didn't make it any less criminal, it only meant the money still existed. Mr. Sullivan, I said quietly, are you telling me my son stole our retirement savings to play the stock market? I'm telling you, he replied carefully, that full restitution is possible if we can reach an agreement. David leaned forward. What kind of agreement? A victim impact statement emphasizing John's remorse, his cooperation, and the unique emotional complexity of family relationships. Something that might influence the judge toward leniency. I stared at Sullivan for a long, silent moment. Then I began to laugh, not politely, but with genuine disbelief. A deep, incredulous laugh that made both men shift uncomfortably in their seats. Mr. Sullivan, I said when I recovered, your client systematically stole from his dying father and grieving mother for 8 years. He forged documents. He lied to federal agents. And according to the FBI, he did the same thing to at least 3 other elderly clients. I leaned closer. And you want me to ask a judge to go easy on him because we share DNA? Mrs. Mitchell, Sullivan pressed. John made mistakes. But prison time won't benefit anyone. If he's incarcerated, he can't work to repay victims. His children will grow up without a father. His wife will face enormous hardship. His children and wife, I said calmly, can visit me anytime they want to understand what it looks like to rebuild your life after someone you trust steals everything from you. He shifted tactics. What would your husband have wanted? Would Robert want his son in federal prison? It was the wrong question. My husband, I said, would have wanted justice. Robert built his company from nothing by treating people fairly and keeping his word. He would be disgusted to know his son became the kind of man he spent his life fighting against. I stood, gathering my purse. Tell your client he'll get the impact statement he deserves. I'll tell the judge exactly what he did, exactly how he hurt us, and exactly why he deserves the maximum sentence allowed by law. Sullivan's confidence cracked. Mrs. Mitchell, that's a decision you may regret. Family bonds can be repaired, but federal convictions are permanent. So is being robbed by your own child, I said, turning toward the door. Good day. By the time I reached my car, my phone was already ringing. Ashley's name lit up the screen. Sarah, she said breathlessly, John's lawyer called me. He said you refused to help with a plea deal. That's correct. But Sarah, if John gets the maximum sentence, it could be 15 years. The children will be adults before he gets out. I sat in the driver's seat, letting her words settle. Ashley, I said quietly, what do you think I should do? Lie to a federal judge? Pretend that being robbed by your own child is less painful because of shared blood? I just thought, maybe for the children's sake. For the children's sake, I interrupted gently. Their father should have thought about consequences before he became a career criminal. I'm not teaching Emma and Tyler that family loyalty requires covering up crimes. That evening, I found Tyler at the kitchen table working on homework, while Emma practiced violin in the living room. Normal sounds, familiar rhythms. But the air carried a tension that hadn't existed before. Tyler, I said softly, can we talk? He looked up, Robert's steady eyes in John's young face. This is about Dad's lawyer calling, isn't it? Smart boy. Too smart sometimes. How do you feel, I asked, about your father possibly going to prison for a long time? He chewed on his pencil, thinking. I'm angry at him, he admitted, but I'm also scared. What scares you most? That people will always think we're like him. That we'll never have a normal life because of what he did. I sat beside him. Tyler, what your father did was wrong, but it doesn't define you or Emma or your mother. You choose who you become. He looked uncertain. But what if people always remember? Then you prove them wrong, I said softly. You live with integrity, you treat people fairly, you work hard and earn what you have. You become the kind of man your grandfather would have been proud of. Tyler nodded slowly. Grandpa Robert was a good man. Yes, I said, and he loved you very much. He'd want you to learn from your father's mistakes. Are you going to help with the plea deal? No, I said firmly. I'm going to tell the truth about what your father did, but I'm not abandoning you, or Emma, or your mother. Relief flooded his face. So we can still live here, as long as you need to. That night, I called Agent Morrison. I want to understand everything, I said. Not just what he did to us, but to his other victims. Are you sure? She asked. Some of it is disturbing. I'm sure. What she told me over the next hour made my stomach twist. John hadn't only stolen from us. He'd targeted the most vulnerable people he could find. Widows like me, overwhelmed and grieving. An 80-year-old man with early dementia. A retired teacher who trusted him after losing her husband. He had drained their savings slowly, methodically, quietly. The total theft was nearly $8 million. The worst part, Morrison added, is how he chose his victims. He searched for clients who were isolated, recently widowed, people without family oversight. He exploited grief, vulnerability, trust. He was a predator, I said quietly. Yes, she replied. And Mrs. Mitchell, the other victims are looking to you. What you do, the strength you show, will decide whether they find the courage to testify. I thought of the elderly teacher, the man with dementia, every trusting soul who had let my son into their finances, believing he was honorable. I knew then what I had to do. Agent Morrison listened quietly as I steadied myself. I told her I would do whatever was necessary to make sure John faced the full consequences of what he had done, and whatever I could to help the other victims get justice, even if it meant my son spending the next 15 years in federal prison. When the call ended, I walked down the hallway of my home, past the framed photographs that marked decades of family life. Pictures of John as a baby, a boy, a young man. Images of the son I had raised, loved, sacrificed for. The son who had grown into a man, capable of preying on vulnerable, elderly people for profit. It was a truth I still felt in my bones every time I looked at those photos. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in February, 8 months to the day after Robert's death. I wore the navy dress I had bought for his funeral, not because I was mourning anyone that morning, but because it was the most dignified outfit I owned, and dignity mattered when you walked into a courtroom to face your own son. John looked smaller than I remembered. Sitting at the defense table in a gray suit that didn't quite fit, he seemed thinner, paler, hollow-eyed, like a man who had finally accepted that there were consequences he couldn't charm or manipulate his way out of. When I entered the courtroom, he looked at me once, and in that brief moment I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Actual remorse. Not regret for being caught, not fear, real, painful understanding of what he had done. It didn't change anything, but it was something. The lead prosecutor, Janet Collins, was a woman close to my age who had spent her career specializing in financial crimes against the elderly. During our preparation meetings, she had told me she chose this work after watching her own mother lose her life savings to an advisor who targeted widows in her retirement community. "This case matters," she had said. "Not just to your family, but to every vulnerable person who trusts the wrong person with their money. We need to show that financial elder abuse carries real consequences, even when the abuser is someone's child." The prosecution built their case piece by piece, each detail cutting deeper than the last. Bank records, forged documents, recorded phone calls where John spoke casually about investment strategies for money that didn't belong to him. Expert testimony explaining exactly how he had moved, hidden, and spent nearly $2 million. Ashley testified on the second day. She wore a simple black dress, her posture uncertain, her voice small. She had lost weight. Without her usual polished look, she appeared younger and painfully vulnerable. "Did you know your husband was stealing from his parents?" Collins asked. Ashley swallowed hard. "No, I didn't." "Did you ever question how your family could afford your lifestyle on your husband's stated income?" Ashley hesitated, then spoke in a whisper. "I should have. I wanted to believe we were just successful. I didn't want to look too closely because I was afraid of what I might find." "And how did you feel when you learned the truth?" Ashley looked directly at me across the courtroom, tears streaking her face. "Horrified and ashamed. These were people who loved us, who trusted us. People who would have helped us if we needed anything, and we were living off money stolen from them." John's attorney tried to paint Ashley as a co-conspirator, but it fell apart immediately. Ashley may have been willfully ignorant, but she hadn't known. On the third day, it was my turn to testify. Collins guided me through the timeline, the fake statements John had presented to me, the lies he told after Robert's death, the years of deception. But the courtroom fell completely silent when she asked the question that mattered most. "Mrs. Mitchell, beyond the financial loss, how did discovering your son's crimes affect you?" I looked at John. For 45 years, Robert had worked 16-hour days building his construction business so we could retire with security. He never splurged, never spent money on himself that could have gone toward our future. He died believing his son would protect me. "My husband died trusting John to take care of me," I said softly. When I discovered what John had done, it wasn't just about losing money. It was losing faith in my own family. It was realizing that for 8 years, every hug, every "I love you," every concerned phone call was part of an elaborate performance designed to keep me from discovering I was being robbed. John lowered his head into his hands and began to cry. "But the worst part," I continued, "was realizing John was counting on my grief, counting on me being too lost, too broken to finish stealing everything Robert and I had worked for. He was waiting for me to die, or become too weak to fight." When Collins asked if I had anything I wanted to say to my son, I spoke slowly. I want him to understand that love without honor is worthless. That family loyalty does not mean protecting someone from consequences, and that the children he worries about not seeing while he's in prison are the same children he would have left with nothing through his theft. There were no follow-up questions. John's attorney tried to challenge me on cross-examination, but every attempt only gave me more opportunity to outline how deliberate John's crimes had been. The defense's case was thin, neighbors and acquaintances describing John as a good man, a devoted father, a respected advisor. Not one of them could explain 8 years of calculated theft. John didn't testify. His attorney knew he couldn't answer the most basic question: how does someone accidentally steal $2 million from their own parents? On Friday afternoon, closing arguments began. The prosecution emphasized the predatory nature of John's crimes and the importance of deterrence. The defense begged for mercy, repeating that prison would not benefit anyone. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They returned with a verdict of guilty on all counts. Sentencing took place weeks later, on a bright spring morning that somehow made the day feel even heavier. Judge Patricia Williams, a stern woman who had spent decades handling white-collar crimes, presided. The courtroom was fuller than I expected. Other victims, journalists, elderly community members who saw this case as a turning point. Margaret sat beside me. Ashley sat in the back with Emma and Tyler, both of whom insisted on being present. They needed to see that choices had consequences. John's attorney made one final plea for leniency, but the performance felt hollow, even desperate. Then Judge Williams asked John if he wanted to speak. He rose slowly. And when he talked, his voice was unsteady. "Your Honor, I have no excuse. None. I stole because I wanted to live a life I didn't earn. I stole because I thought I could get away with it." He turned to look at me. "Mom, I know sorry isn't enough. I know I can't undo what I did. I stole your security, your peace, your trust. I made you a victim in your own home. And the worst part is that Dad died believing I would protect you. He died trusting me, and I was planning to steal everything he worked for." Emma was crying quietly. Tyler stared at the floor. John looked at them too. "I want my children to understand that prison isn't something being done to me. It's something I earned. And I want them to know their grandmother is not responsible for any of this. She did what any honest person would do." Judge Williams reviewed her notes, her face solemn. "Mr. Mitchell," she said at last, "in 23 years on this bench, I've seen many cases of financial elder abuse. What distinguishes yours is not only the amount stolen, but the systematic predatory nature of your crimes and the particular cruelty of targeting your own parents." She paused. "You did not steal to feed your family. You stole to fund a lifestyle of luxury while your father worked himself to death building the savings you were plundering. You bought country club memberships and European vacations with money meant to secure your mother's future." I felt a quiet, cold satisfaction at hearing those truths spoken aloud. "However," she continued, "I acknowledge your cooperation, your genuine remorse, and the fact that full restitution will be made to all victims." Her sentence would follow. My heart sank. She was going to be lenient. "Therefore," Judge Williams continued, "I sentence you to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You will make full restitution to all victims, plus interest and penalties." She paused, looking directly at John. "And Mr. Mitchell," John lifted his eyes, "I hope you spend every day of those 12 years thinking about the elderly people who trusted you with their life savings, and the parents who loved you enough to hold you accountable for your crimes." 12 years. John would be 63 when he got out. Emma would be 27. Tyler 25, old enough to have their own lives, their own careers, their own families. As court officers led John away, he looked back at me one last time. There was real sorrow in his eyes and something else. Gratitude. Gratitude that I'd been strong enough to stop him before he became something even worse. Gratitude that someone in his life still chose truth over the easy lie. I gave him a single, small nod. It was the closest thing to forgiveness I could offer. Outside the courthouse, Agent Morrison found me surrounded by elderly supporters, many thanking me for taking a stand. "How do you feel?" she asked quietly. I thought of Robert, of the 8 months since his death, of the woman I had become through fire, betrayal, loss, and strength. I feel free, I said. Free for the first time since Robert died. Free from fear. Free from deception. Free from being a silent victim. That evening, Ashley and the children sat with me in the living room, eating pizza and trying to imagine what the next 12 years would look like. Will you visit him? Emma asked. Maybe, Ashley said gently. When you're older, you can decide for yourselves. Tyler, now 14 and already taller than his mother, spoke with unexpected certainty. I want to see him once, he said. To tell him I understand why Grandma did what she did, and to tell him I'm going to be better than he was. Emma nodded. I want that too. I looked at them, these children who had lost their father not to death, but to his own choices, and felt a swell of hope. They were determined not to repeat the past. Robert would have been proud. Later that night, Margaret and I shared a bottle of wine, sitting in the quiet comfort of a house finally at peace. Any regrets? She asked. I thought about John in his prison cell, about Ashley trying to rebuild from ashes, about Emma and Tyler carrying a complicated family history into adulthood. No, I said. Justice was done. And maybe some elderly person out there will be protected because a predator heard about this case and realized the consequences aren't worth the risk. I raised my glass toward Robert's photograph. We did good, honey, I whispered. We raised a son who made terrible choices, but we also taught him to face them, and we taught me that strength lasts longer than grief. Weeks passed in quiet rebuilding. Emma and Tyler settled into new routines. Ashley found part-time work. The house felt alive again. 3 months later, a letter arrived from John. It was handwritten. Simple, honest. Mom, I know I have no right to ask anything from you, but I want you to know something. What you did saved me. I was planning to steal everything. If you hadn't stopped me, I would have destroyed more families. Thank you for loving me enough to hold me accountable. Tell Emma and Tyler that having a grandmother with integrity is worth more than having a father without consequences. I love you. John, I read the letter once, folded it carefully, and placed it in my jewelry box beside Robert's old watch, the watch he wore through 45 years of honest work. Some gifts are worth keeping, even when they come from broken places. I'm 67 now, living in my own house, raising my grandchildren with their mother's help, sleeping peacefully for the first time in years. I've learned something important. Justice feels a lot like freedom. And if you're listening to this today, I hope you never forget that your voice and your courage matter more than you know. If you want more real family stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. And if you've ever faced betrayal or hidden truth in your own family, share your story in the comments. I'm here, I'm listening.